Hey everybody, it is Steve Garvin, and I am joined today by Dawn Hancy. We are doing another one of our spotlights on the Heart Notes Anthology contributors. Welcome to our spotlight, Dawn.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell me about your experience in writing your Dear Legacy Bearers Heart Note. What inspired that?
Well, I think it's like a seed that's been germinating actually for a couple of years since the beginning of the pandemic, when things were very uncertain. Not that they're all that certain now, but it was really both a crisis and an opportunity to choose how we wanted to look at things. And now we have phrases like the new normal and the before times and post-pandemic, transition to endemic, whatever. We're still trying to navigate uncertain times. But early on in that time period, there were some awards being given out. And I remember hearing Lady Gaga say, this is a new renaissance. This is like a big reset, is kind of how I took that. She was saying, claim this moment. And it's not just a disaster. Yes, there is suffering, and we have compassion for that. And maybe we've suffered ourselves in some ways as well. But that also doesn't preclude opportunity, growth, healing. They can be simultaneous, not to diminish, the challenges or the suffering at all, but also, right from the beginning to say that's not all this is going to be, because we're co-creating it, we're framing it, we're looking for that opportunity. And so the idea of a new renaissance, of course, renaissance being rebirth, reset, recreating, another opportunity, since time and history and experience are cyclical, living on a planet that's round, traveling around the sun. This is the nature of things. And so I find it easier when we go with the flow and work with the cycles. And we may be beginning things anew, but we're also building on the past. And we're also really laying the groundwork for the future, paradoxically, in ways that we can be mindful of right now. And also, of course, in ways that we have no idea how they will really unfold and manifest. And, thinking about looking at our ancestors, whether cultural ancestors or biological, back to the time often known as the Renaissance, the European Renaissance, about 500-ish years seemed like a pretty good round number, to try to get my mind around. And just seeing what's happened since then, all that's been achieved, all that hasn't been achieved, maybe even things that have been lost. But then what if we project that amount of time into the future? Again, we can't know for sure what's going to happen, or even how what we're doing now is going to be received or interpreted or understood by future generations. But we can plant those seeds as well. And not wanting to just glorify the European Renaissance, but also to realize not only was that, the reverse, the flip side, a time of great growth and opportunity, but also a time of oppression and suffering. And this is one of the gifts that the, history gives us, the ability to look back from a modern perspective and be able to accept, yes, all of those things are true.
Yeah, so it's kind of a hinge point in looking back at the European Renaissance and then projecting forward, what is a Renaissance that we're beginning to lay the foundation for.
Right. Exactly.
Because I know in 500 years ago, they weren't imagining all the things that would be different today.
Right.
But they were laying the foundation for what came afterwards. And similarly, we are doing the same thing in laying the foundation for what comes after us. What's our legacy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. They did have some of those grand dreams, flying machines and whatnot you find in Leonardo's notebooks, right?
Right.
So some of the things that seemed unbelievable then actually have come true. So that can give us encouragement that what may seem really out of reach or impossible, don't give up on the dream if it seems important.
Yeah.
So just to recognize it, not that he built the airplanes that we have today, let alone rockets and satellites and everything else. The James Webb now soaring off on its mission. And but yet, he drew what he saw. It was his vision. And that's all we need to do, is claim our vision. That's not all we need to do, because we really need to make sure we're making space for other people's visions as well. And I think that we can hold and cultivate perhaps a less competitive and more cooperative vision of really co-creating this new renaissance in a way that all can flourish. And just a few at the expense of many, which has been all too often the case in history.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting how much has transpired in the last couple of years, not only with the pandemic, but also, the Black Lives Matter movement has moved forward in some ways. Battles we've been fighting for generations. And hopefully we're making some progress such that those who look back on our time will recognize the human progress that we've made, the global progress we've made as far as the earth itself goes. We are in an opportune time when much could go right, and also much could go wrong.
Exactly. And just to have the humility and the courage at the same time to embrace all of those things. We have set, global warming in motion to a degree that we're not going to be able to call it back. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. Mitigation, harm reduction are the strategies now. So as you say, the planet itself and our technology, but also not only technology. All too often advancement is gauged in terms of the, greater weapons or things that have been weaponized, even if they have other uses or other origins as well. So we need to be mindful of how things might be used and really grow ethically, which I feel has been happening at the same time, as you say, the Black Lives Matter movement, LGBTQ rights, the Me Too movement. There's some, however many waves of feminism you want to count, and intersectionality, ableism, ageism, all of these things come together. How many of us ever just experience only one of those things? That's not possible. We all encounter race, gender, ability, all of those things all the time. And the mindfulness is like the new frontier in a way. 500 years ago, people were starting to explore the earth literally in boats during a time when many people still believed the earth was flat. You were going to fall off the edge. There are just sea monsters waiting for you out there. Right. And so there have been some pretty big mindset shifts and technical and scientific advances in learning. And but also we need to do that inner work and the inner frontiers as well. Some of the scientific advancements in technology have outpaced our ability to manage them and manage ourselves and really benefit our communities. So in the new Renaissance, we can be more mindful of not replicating or even worsening the inequalities and the disadvantages and the suffering. Not to be so impressed with our own technological and intellectual abilities, but to realize that that's just one form of our intelligence, our intuition, our healing abilities, our compassion, our creativity. These are really our superpowers, not just making a bigger club to beat each other up with, really. Sometimes that just, in my darker moments, it kind of seems like that's what it comes down to. But there are other things as well. Simultaneously, different threads arising.
Absolutely.
Healing all at the same time.
I have to wonder, as we have the Heart Note anthology.
Indeed.
Got a copy. I have to wonder if the past Renaissance was more about our intellectual awakening, and our current Renaissance, hopefully, may be about our heart awakening. But rather than just proving how smart we are and how technologically advanced we are, how can we reconnect with our hearts and the heart song within in order to create, a more equitable, more possibility for everybody, including the planet.
Yes. And perhaps ironically, the focus on the rational, the logic, the scientific exploration, the physical, the technical, the intellectual, those things at that time, over the last several hundred years, becoming more of a secular society and less integrated or really bound by religious, if not always spiritual and ethical systems and structures and power, really. And that's part of what is being renegotiated and reset. The focus on the intellect helped society move away from being controlled by powerful members of religious organizations of the European Church, for instance. And by creating that space, now we can, again, in a cyclical fashion, come back to the questions of spiritual identity in a new way, having had 500 years of, approximately coming out of that medieval mindset where the superstitions and the power structures and the rules of the church really constrained every aspect of life and power to a few and took it away from many. And just the freedom of thought that engendered is beautiful. And you're right, we can't stop there. We need to now integrate with the heart, with the soul, with our intuition, our divine connection, manifesting the divine beings that we are. Science still has not explained away that sacred spark of life. I don't care how many of the elements they find on Mars or, orbiting some sun or anywhere else, they're still just physical elements. The consciousness, the spark of life, it's not there. It's not on the periodic chart. It isn't going to be. It doesn't happen that way. It's still a mystery. And yet that's what it is. That is the answer. It's beyond our intellectual understanding. So we can add a little both humility in there and realize, well, we're smart, but we're not that smart, or that kind of smart isn't all there is. And then also embrace the gloriousness of how we are connected to the infinite divine and actually begin to develop some of those skills with a more technical eye and a scientific eye to studying what we might just call energy in this amorphous sense, because we really don't understand it and haven't developed maybe the instruments to measure it, capture it, that sort of thing. But, in the last couple of centuries, even 150, 200 years ago, people didn't understand what oxygen was. The scientists of the time called it phlogiston or something. They had a placeholder idea that there's something happening here when you cover up this living being that they were doing experiments on, a mouse or something small like that. When you completely cover it up and cut it off from air, it dies. So may our experiments be more ethical and cause no suffering to any living being where possible. But just, again, how smart we think we are, we're still just discovering phlogiston in some new form. And maybe it's healing energy. Maybe it is some aspect of spirit, of soul, psychology, emotions, they can be understood and studied further, and we can use our technology and our intellect to pursue those things that are as yet invisible.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I am wondering and inviting the readers of the Heart Note anthology to consider at the end of the book, we've got several pages where you can write your own Heart Note. What is the legacy that you're creating? How are you, conquering space, conquering inner space, and maybe conquering is not the best word in this situation, but what is a legacy that we're creating? What are we creating today that wasn't here yesterday? And what does that look like when our heart is free to express?
Exactly. And how can we nurture the hearts of those who come after us? And partly by looking back as well as forward and reinterpreting history, because we can't really understand it as it's happening the way we can years later when we look back. Not to say that either of those are correct or true. They're all true. They're all pieces of the puzzle of our greater understanding. So I think it is useful to study history, especially because the way we look at it now is not the way we would have seen it or understood it 100 years ago or 500 years ago, and just allowing for that change.
Thank you, Dawn, for contributing to this conversation and for contributing your heart note to Dear Legacy Bearers. Hopefully we're planting some seeds of possibility for what may lay ahead.
Exactly. It's inevitable, so we might as well do it consciously from our hearts. Thank you.
Beautiful.